So I've noticed that sometimes class discussions turn into more like a series of like speeches, like mini speeches from like the teacher and the students, and everyone's just sort of saying things that like come to mind, like ideas pop up, and they don't end up really becoming much of a conversation. And then it's worst of all when someone says something that's just wrong, or someone says something that's interesting, but then the next person to speak up like is referring to something from like three people ago, and that really interesting thought we never end up ever really coming back to, and maybe the person who said it feels like, what was the point of saying it? And yeah, it's not really a conversation. It's just, like I said, it's just mini speeches. So following up, if we get some students each time, each discussion doing following up, uh, that could really improve the conversation, the discussion for everybody. And I've really got like two ways of following up. And one thing about both of them is you don't have to have an original thought. You don't have to be an expert on the topic. And I'm going to start with the questions one because this one's really kind of perfect. So someone says something, and maybe it was like two or three people ago, but maybe it takes you that long to like kind of form the question in your mind of what it is you want to ask. And there are different kinds of questions you could ask. So let's focus on the kind of where you're asking for just more detail. Okay, you're just requesting more detail or wanting them to kind of explain, like defend why they were saying what they were saying. So it's great because as long as you do it right, and I'll get that to that in a moment. But when you ask a question, it works both ways. So if you ask them something to like explain what they were saying, and when called out, they're like, I don't really know. If they can't defend their claim or they can't give, great, right? You've just saved us from following that kind of wrong idea. And you've even helped that person. They may not feel great in that single moment, but you've even helped that person to realize, oh, yeah, I didn't know this as well as I thought that I did. Now, on the other hand, if they can defend it, right, if you ask them for more information and they have it, great also, right? Then again, we've got more detail than we had before. That person feels like, hey, yeah, I can back this up. And even if that person can't, but someone over here can, now you've even helped that person because that person, from asking that question, you've helped that person because now they've got something to say. Maybe it's someone who doesn't speak up very much. You've given them something to be able to say and to add. So see, like asking a question is almost like, there's kind of no way to fail. Almost. Okay, and that gets us to the second part. Part of the follow up is doing it politely. And that's especially if you're making a statement. But let me just go back on like the question. So if you ask a question like, what are you talking about when you said, right? That's not a great way to start. Um, Maybe choosing different words would be better, right? Can you explain what you meant when you said, or can you give you an example? Because I'm not sure where you're saying, right? Like putting it that kind of way. And like I showed you, whatever the answer is to that question that you ask, whoever it is, it's going to work well either way. Again, as long as you're doing it politely. And sometimes it's not just the words, it's the tone that we use. Like, can you explain what you were talking about? Right? Like, same words as before, but there's that way of sort of saying it. And if you think you're being a little bit obnoxious, you can even say, I don't want to be obnoxious, but I'm not trying to be rude, right? Can kind of cover it up that way. Now, the other thing you can point out politely is do it in a statement, okay? So maybe someone said something and you can say, like, I want to go back to when Barney or whatever said something. You could sort of summarize it real briefly. Because I actually think whatever it is that you think. Or you can also point out, like, you can follow up again from like three or four people ago and say, like, I just want to say that when Barney or whoever said that, I had the same reaction because I think whatever it is that you happen to think. So pointing out really good contributions can also be really helpful and something that you can throw in there as well.